Michael, I think I start the music.
Africa,
Can I start? Good evening. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Hello?
We can hear you.
Yes, loud and clear.
Greetings to you all and welcome to this policy dialogue, the Surplus Trust Policy Dialogue Forum on Zoom, also live streaming on Facebook and on YouTube. Today, our topic is the recent IMF and World Bank reports on Zimbabwe, evidence of economic recovery or delusions underpinned by conventional motives, ? The context. Zimbabwe's economic history has always been within the orbit of the international economic system, notwithstanding claims in early post-independence that Zimbabwe was on a socialist course or an autonomous course. If there were such claims and even posturing in the first decade of post-independence, the reality dawned soon thereafter with the introduction of the Economic Structural Adjustment Program of the early 90s. This led to growth in inverted commerce, with the last positive figures reported in 1996, but with the enhanced downward spiral ever since, a combination of our own mismanagement of the economy and the burden of complying with the demands of the international financial institutions. By the late 90s, Zimbabwe fell into the bad books of these international financial institutions, leading to arrears, growing debt, some arrears of which have only recently been cleared with respect to the IMF in 2016. Both the IMF and World Bank have remained engaged with Zimbabwe. The offices are very present in Harare. And perhaps the recent reports which we are discussing today reflect an intention to enhance those relations with Zimbabwe. So what does it mean? What does it say about the timing of the reports? The IMF report on 16th June and a week earlier, the World Bank report. As someone said, it was almost like a beauty contest between the two financial institutions. But as I'll indicate shortly, on the 17th of June, the IMF released a report on Sudan. So before I make any conclusions or try to make conclusions, let me look briefly at what these reports say without going into details, leaving the details to the presenters here. So on June 16th, 2021, an International Monetary Fund staff team led by Gura conducted a virtual staff visit to the Zimbabwe authorities during the 1st of June to the 15th of June to discuss recent economic developments and the economic outlook. To quote Gura, Zimbabwe has shown resilience in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic and other exogenous shocks. The pandemic, on top of Cyclone Idai in 2019, a protracted drought and weak policy buffers has taken a severe toll on the economic and humanitarian situation. Despite the authorities' timely actions to support the most vulnerable groups and businesses during the pandemic, the real GDP contracted by 4% in 2020 after a 6% decline in 2019. However, an economic recovery is underway in 2021, with real GDP expected to grow by about 6%, reflecting a bumper agricultural output, increased energy production, and the resumption of greater manufacturing and construction activities. Uncertainty remains high, however, and the outlook will depend on the pandemic's evolution, the pace of vaccination, and implementation of sustainable policies. The IMF mission notes the authorities' efforts to stabilize the local currency and lower inflation. In this regard, contained budget deficits and reserve money growth, as well as the introduction of a foreign exchange auction system, are policy measures in the right direction. And it goes on and says Zimbabwe has been a fund member in good standing since it cleared its outstanding arrears to the IMF in late 2016. The fund provides extensive technical assistance in the areas of economic governance and financial sector reforms, as well as macroeconomic statistics. However, the IMF is precluded from providing financial support to Zimbabwe due to an unsustainable debt and official external arrears. A fund financial arrangement would require a clear path to comprehensive restructuring of Zimbabwe's external debt, including the clearance of arrears and obtaining financial assurance from official creditors. A reform plan that is consistent with macroeconomic stability, growth, and poverty reduction, a reinforcement of the social safety net, and governance and transparency reforms, so on and so forth. So really, that is the nature of the IMF report. The World Bank, a week earlier, on the 10th of June, begins with the following. The number of extremely poor citizens in Zimbabwe rose to 7.9 million in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And its impacts, according to the World Bank's economic analysis for the country, which is called the Zimbabwe Economic Update, Overcoming Economic Challenges, Natural Disasters, and the Pandemic, Social and Economic Impacts. It cites surveys conducted in 2020, which show nearly 500,000 Zimbabwean households have at least one member who lost her or his job, causing many households to fall into poverty and worsen the plight of the existing poor. Food insecurity was also exacerbated by inadequate reach coverage of relevant social protection programs, i.e. less than a quarter of the increased number of extreme poor households received food aid in June 2020. And this share dropped to 3% of rural households in September 2020. And so on and so forth. And it also ends with some recommendations as what should be done. Domestic policies will support price stability and the optimal use of public resources, especially given large financial needs to prevent a deterioration in human capital. Reallocate spending from inefficient, distortive subsidies to targeted measures that limit the toll of the pandemic. Adopt policies should take into account the country's limited fiscal space and the significant financing required to arrest further deterioration, and so on and so forth. So we have these two reports. And as I said earlier, these reports are released almost the same time as one on Sudan, and leading others to conclude that the import of these reports are less to do with the claim of economic recovery than the objective of roping in the so-called rogue states, roping them into the orbit and insisting on discipline, inverted commas. So, to help us in this discussion today, we have a very eminent panel of economic gurus, political activists, and academics, and a former Minister of Finance. Our first speaker will be Joseph Mverecha, a chief economist and head of strategy at the AFC Commercial Bank, formerly Agribank. Joseph has 20 years or more experience in economic research, macroeconomic policy, and business development, having joined the RBZ as an assistant economist in 1992, rising to the position of assistant director in 2003, and chief economist in 2005. He holds a BSc Economic Honours degree in economics from UZ in 1991. Then he had a Chevening scholarship to the UK, doing an MBA in International Banking and Finance at Birmingham University. He has undergone various professional courses at Gordon Institute of Business Sciences, London School of Economics, Bank of Malaysia, Bank of England, Reserve Bank of South Africa, and the Treasury of South Africa. Joseph is married to Emily Mverecha. I will ask you to come in just now, Joseph. And then our second speaker is Janet Jo. Janet is not a newcomer on our forum. She's executive director of Zim. She's a prominent activist and running an organization that is more sensitive to the plight of the poor and vulnerable in our society. Our third speaker, another well-known academic, Philan Zamchia, who was a doctorate from Oxford and has done tremendous work in the field of rural development, political analysis in general, and he has graced this forum many times. Last but not least, my Mzukuru Tendai Biti, former Minister of Finance during the GNU, a lawyer, economist now, through the experience that he's had in practice as a minister and also as a politician. And more recently, he was chair of the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament. We also have a host of discussants from across the political spectrum in Zimbabwe and abroad. From ZANU-PF, we would have had Chris Mchangwa, but sadly, Chris was also a young brother of mine. He lost his brother, Forbes Mchangwa, today, and so he's not unable to join us. We have Richard Mahomba from the ZANU-PF office. We have members of the Presidential Advisory Committee on standby. We have officials of RBZ and other gurus such as Tony Hawkins, Dan Dlela, and of course, the World Bank and IMF people are listening in. And abroad, we have Todd Moss in Washington, DC, Sarah Dorman in UK, Michelle Gavin, and many others, such as those who are often on this program. And before we bring in Joseph Mverecha, we'd like to play a video clip of Minister Mthuli Ncwebe's interview with Richard Quest of CNN. Would have liked and we hope the minister is listening in this discussion. But in his absence, we think this video clip might help to summarize both his reaction to the IMF and World Bank reports and also his position on the nature of the economy in Zimbabwe. So please, Michael, can you give us that clip?
Let's get straight to this important point. The worsening situation economically as a result of COVID, the limited fiscal policy that you have and monetary policy, how bad do you think how much worse do you think it's going to get?
Zimbabwe is situated the other way. Actually, it is the opposite of what you've just said. So basically, we're finding that while we're able to balance the budget, that's what I've been doing in the last 2 years. Secondly, we have a strong economic recovery. where Zimbabwe will grow faster than its peers in the region and its peers in Africa. We have set aside a decent amount of resources to acquire vaccines. And in fact, in the next few weeks, we're going on a blitz to basically vaccinate people to the tune of 2.5 million people
Minister,
over the next few weeks. So it's the exact opposite. We are doing well indeed.
No, hang on a second, Minister. The World Bank says that the number of people in extreme poverty in Zimbabwe, more than half of the Zimbabweans are in extreme poverty, is the latest statistics from the World Bank. Now, admittedly, many of them were already there, but you're painting a picture, a rosy picture, and I'm suggesting it's not that rosy.
Well, the picture is never rosy, Richard. We're all reeling under the impact of the pandemic. But I can assure you that Zimbabwe is doing all it can to deal with the social impact of the pandemic. We have a very robust social protection program, which is various elements. First of all, there's the productive social protection element in the agricultural sector, where we give free inputs to citizens to farm, and they've done very well. They've produced about 1 million metric tons of maize and maize alone. We're also protecting the vulnerable rural areas through cash transfers and through free medication, and the vaccine is free. So we have a very robust social protection program that also includes, free schooling for vulnerable children. This is good. This is going very well indeed. Of course, we're doing this with the assistance of our international partners as well. So something is being done, and we believe that we've had the best response to the pandemic so far, and our vaccination program is fairly robust and well run, in fact.
And as you look to, obviously, the Delta variant moving in, and there is this, I mean, there are two things going on here, aren't there? There's the race against virus versus vaccine, and then you've got the race, the balance act of livelihoods versus lives. So where are you balancing? Where do you see Zimbabwe at the moment in both of those balancing acts?
Richard, you're right that we have to balance every time the need to save lives and the need to save livelihoods. And we have to balance that carefully. So while we have this lockdown, we've made sure that essential industries continue to be open. The private sector continues to function. Exports continue to be moved around to the rest of the world. Of course, we've introduced a shorter working day in order to, again, to restrict the movement as well as the transmission of the virus. So it's a balancing act. We've done this just for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, we'll review, see where we are, see where we need to loosen or extend. But you can be sure we are watching these things like a hawk. I do that. I know that an extended lockdown can reduce revenues and therefore, reduce our ability to respond to the pandemic in the first place. So we are balancing this very carefully, and I think we're in the right equilibrium.
If you look to the future now, that I mean, let's look beyond COVID. There is disappointment at the extent of the transparency measures being taken by the government. There was a lot more hope than reality has proven in changes of openness and transparency from this government. Are you going to do more to make Zimbabwe a more open and economy, a more transparent and anti-corruption economy?
Zimbabwe is open for business. Zimbabwe is transparent, and it is obvious for all to see. And where is this optimism coming from? Just look at the latest IMF report. It will tell you that things are improving. We are managing public finances better. Again, we're looking towards balancing the budget as I did last year, with a account surplus. The exchange rate is stable. We have a very well-functioning monetary policy system, which coordinates very well with the fiscal side of things. So the economy is very stable. It is growing. Everything is transparent. We have a well-functioning anti-corruption commission that is bringing cases to book. The justice is taking its course. So transparency is improving, and Zimbabwe has improved its rankings in the environment for doing business, which are global, and introduced a Zimbabwe investment development agency, which is explaining to the world how investments are down, how investments are protected. Transparency is improving, and the environment for doing business is improving, and so is the macroeconomy.
And we will talk about it in the future. Minister, grateful that you've taken time. It's early evening where you are, and I'm grateful for your time. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for that clip. And I think without any further ado, I'll ask Joseph Mverecha to come in. What are the facts and figures? What's your response to the minister? What's your response to the two reports, the World Bank and IMF reports? But more important, what are the facts and figures? Is there economic growth, or are we being fed a dummy? Joseph Mverecha.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mr. Convener, and good evening, colleagues. Good evening, Zimbabwe. If you are hearing me, permit me to read briefly from the IMF report that you have summarized and the World Bank report. The IMF states that following recent years of contraction in real GDP contracted by 4% in 2020 after a 6% decline in 2019. However, an economic recovery is underway in 2021, with real GDP expected to grow by 6%, reflecting Bamba agricultural output and construction activities. That's the summary from the IMF. I'll also read briefly the World Bank report, which says economic growth this year will be led by recovery in agriculture. Actually, the World Bank states that Zimbabwe is projected to reach 3.9% growth in 2021. Again, this is led by agriculture. The World Bank notes that economic recovery in Zimbabwe is expected to strengthen further in 2022 and beyond, with GDP growing at a projected average of 5.1%, particularly as the vaccines deployment, vaccination progresses, and also the implementation of NDS1. These are the two reports that you have highlighted, and also the clip from the minister. My response is as follows, and you will permit me to summarize a few things, particularly the issue to do with real GDP growth and the journey towards macroeconomic stability, which the country is undertaking since 2.5 years ago. In terms of real GDP, the facts are clearly on the growth trajectory. They confirm the growth trajectory that the country is experiencing, particularly as a result of agriculture growth. We see particularly all the cereals, all the subsectors in agriculture, for instance, maize, tobacco, maize likely to grow in excess of 150, closer to 200%. The tobacco is growing, cotton is growing, nearly all the small grains are growing. Essentially, the likelihood is that agriculture alone will grow by anywhere between 18 to 22% in real terms, because of the rains, the good rains, and also the smallholder producers of maize really turned up in terms of the output and production and productivity this year. So we foresee a huge surge in agriculture production, also coming from a lower base year last year after the drought and the COVID-19 El Nino in 2019. So we have a lower base and we have a surge in agriculture production, which essentially is powering the economy forward this year towards the growth rates that the IMF and the World Bank point out. I am, however, somewhere in between the IMF and the World Bank. I do think that real GDP growth might be somewhere around 4.4%. With half of that, about 2.2% or 2.4% of that is coming from agriculture, because agriculture's share of GDP at 9.5%, according to Zim stats, is still fairly very low, particularly if you compare to where we were in the 1990s, where agriculture accounted for nearly 20% of GDP, a third of exports, and nearly 25% of employment in the economy in the early 1990s before the structural adjustment program. So GDP share of agriculture is very low, below 10%. And so therefore, even a surge that we expect is likely to contribute somewhere around 2.4% in GDP. I do believe this economy is on growth trajectory this year, likely somewhere between 4.4% of GDP. And further, the second aspect related to that is the issue of macroeconomic stability, or the journey towards macroeconomic stability, which the IMF also highlights jointly also with the World Bank in their report. This is how I would summarize it in terms of the journey towards macroeconomic stability. It's like one embarking on a journey from Harare to Mtare. And if you get to Rusape, you are within shouting distance of Mtare. You know that you have 90 plus a few kilometers to get to Mtare. If you are traveling from Harare to Koblawai and you go past Shangan towards Membes, you know that you are left with 100 or so kilometers to get to your destiny. Have we achieved macroeconomic stability yet? Maybe no, but the direction is towards macroeconomic stability, particularly with the inflation front, headline inflation coming down from a peak of 8.34% in June, July, and collapsing now to June around 106%. Most, in all likelihood, inflation will continue to trend further down unless there are other significant shocks that might occur from a policy point of view. But in all likelihood, we foresee inflation decelerating further, maybe to 55-58% by July, likely in the range of 35 to 40% or 30 to 35% by year end. If that were to be achieved, it is a huge surge, particularly if you compare to the inflationary spiral that we experienced in end of 2018 and 2019 and 2020. In 2022, with policy refinements and strengthening of fiscal and monetary policy coordination, it is quite possible for inflation to decelerate further to somewhere between 15 to 20%. Again, the assumption is there are no policy mishaps or there are no policy reversals. There is definite work that we need to do, that needs to be done on the structural front in terms of strengthening fiscal and monetary policy, and inflation is within reach or will likely be within reach of 15 to 20% by next year. And what does that tell us? That you are within range of single-digit inflation by 2023. Again, the key assumption is essentially exactly as the IMF raised. If there is authorities strengthen fiscal and structural reforms, strengthen coordination of monetary and fiscal policy, and implement measures on which must be implemented on the foreign exchange auction to make it more efficient and more durable and more reflective of market fundamentals, then essentially the economy is on course for further deceleration in inflation. So the next 18 months will be defining, in my view, very much defining in terms of the policy framework and the policy implementation matrix. The journey so far is in the right direction. We may not have achieved macro stability yet, but within distance, within calling distance. The next thing I would like to highlight is again the public perception, the business perception. That's the third thing I would highlight. I have got with me here, Ms. Convener, a number of documents, among them the CZI Quarterly Business and Intelligence Report, which was released in May. And again, they highlight the kind of confidence that has been prevailing in the business sector since June of last year with inception of the foreign exchange auction. And I quote their report, their capacity utilization, they highlight as 47%, which is very low compared to what could actually obtain. But the important thing is They also highlight that their anticipation is for capacity utilization growth to 56% in Q2. And of course, there are other baseline assumptions underpinning those kind of forecasts from and optimism from the business community, particularly the issue of foreign currency, the issue of strengthening monetary and fiscal policy, the issue of refinements and implementation of the foreign exchange auction to make it more efficient. They assume that if this is sustained or continued, then we are likely to experience further growth in capacity, maybe even to 61% by year end. However, we also note there are vulnerabilities in the economy. And both the World Bank and the IMF highlight concretely, comprehensively these vulnerabilities. I'll summarize a few of them. The issue of COVID, the pandemic, is an ongoing problem. It continues to disrupt economic activity. The lockdowns is impacting on business and supply, disruptions of supply chains and so forth. But again, on the other hand, the government's program on vaccination is likely to continue to be rolled. Another vulnerability has to do with the power and power outages, particularly with Hwange now. The capacity of Hwange, 900 megawatts, is likely to be significantly lower than that. We are experiencing quite severe power cuts at the present moment. That's also a huge vulnerability. Likelihood also of interest rates going up, global interest rates going up and impacting on credit flows and the price of money coming to Zimbabwe. We are seeing in many parts of the globe how countries are responding to the pandemic. The US with its 1.9 trillion stimulus package. Is there a likelihood that interest rates, this might overheat the US economy, which may in turn force the hand of the Fed and maybe other central banks in the world, big central banks in the world, to raise interest rates, and which will impact, of course, on the price of money coming into the economy. These are vulnerabilities. In addition, of course, to possible policy reversals that might happen along the way. But the key issue, Mr. Convener, is that durable macroeconomic stability is not far. We are not yet there, but it's not far. If authorities stay the course and continue on the path of macro reforms and continue on the path of strengthening the foreign exchange market framework, for instance, I genuinely believe that durable stability is not far, which will then create the conditions for sustainable growth. The economy in Zimbabwe, as everywhere in the rest of the world, the economy grows out of investment, both domestic and foreign. We will only be able to sustain growth of the economy to the extent that we are able to attract investment in key sectors of the economy, in agriculture, in mining, in industry, manufacturing, in the construction sector, in many other subsectors or sectors of the economy. The key going forward, in my view, must be to deepen structural reforms and to focus in particular, first things first. I would say, what is the first thing, macro principle? It is to make sure that we do everything to strengthen macroeconomic stability, to journey forward, not to stop at Shangan or not to stop at Rusape, but stay the course, go all the way to Mtare and go all the way to Blawayo. Investment in health, in education, in social infrastructure, in services, which we have neglected over the past decades, that needs to be sustained. And we need more investment in education, more investment in social and health, in social sectors and health, physical infrastructure as well. These are the key components that will sustain economic growth on a sustainable basis. If we are thinking and dreaming in terms of medium-term growth, such as will be necessary for broad-based transformation, for youth and gender mainstreaming, we have to stay the course. It's going to be a little bit more painful, but I think the economy has already endured much more pain from where we come from in 2018. Going forward, what really needs to be done is to stay the course. Financial inclusion, support and investment in SMEs, all these will be critical for creating a broad-based growth of the economy that creates jobs and opportunities for everyone. We must improve our doing business conditions. We must make sure that it is easy for investors to come and invest in Zimbabwe. And of course, the issues to do with border delays, all these have to be addressed. Issues to do with corruption, we have to adopt a zero tolerance for corruption and really fight corruption in a very visible manner. And that way, in my view, it will form the basis of what needs to be done to stay the course. The difficult part will be, in my view, how we deal with fiscal consolidation, expanded monetary reforms, further tightening of monetary policy going forward in 2020 and 2023, against the background, of course, of the many demands that we see, the limited fiscal space and the rising demands for financing the COVID, the pandemic, the vaccination process, to ensure that millions of our people in the country are sufficiently vaccinated. So the challenges are huge and the vulnerabilities are there. Let's not gloss over them. But the potential also, in my view, is very huge for the country to now move forward. The elusive stability that has eluded us over the past 10 years or so, 20, we are, in my view, within the shores of that. I think, Mr. Convener, we are where we were, where Vietnam was in 1995 or 1994, if I may give that allegory. As you would know, the case for Vietnam is particularly very striking. More than 10 times, 12 times growth in per capita income in the past 30 years. Average GDP growth somewhere between 6 to 7% on an annual basis. 30 million people out of poverty over the past 30 years. After 3 wars, first defeating the French in 1954, and then the Americans moving in and defeating the Americans in 1975, then beginning their reforms in 1986, the Doi Moi reforms, which were further expanded in 1991. I think Zimbabwe is somewhere where Vietnam was in 1994 and 1995 at the beginning of the reforms. They stayed the course and they have achieved remarkable growth over the past 8. They have achieved remarkable things. 75% of Vietnam was living in chronic poverty in 1991. Today, it's just somewhere under 20%. If you are able to stay the course, raise GDP growth on a sustainable basis, ensure low and stable inflation, single-digit inflation, not for 1 month, not 2 months, not for 1 year, but year after year after year after year, for a decade, for 15 years, for 20 years, then you are on the path for really making a difference in terms of reducing chronic poverty in the country. You spoke about, I think it was Richard Quest who was speaking to the minister about the levels of chronic poverty in our country, which is high, and also high in income inequalities, which we all see everywhere you go. The level of staggering wealth for few and the level of poverty everywhere among the rural and urban sprawling poor. We can.
Joseph, isn't that the point really of the discussion? That perhaps it's macroeconomic stability and even growth, if it's claimed to be, at the expense of the majority of the population. And the World Bank report itself talks about more than 50% of the population in dire poverty. Aren't we looking at economic growth as a one-sided and conventional way, in the manner in which the World Bank and IMF have always viewed these things? That the poverty, the condition of the people on the other side of the stream becomes secondary to the quest for growth at any rate. How would you answer that?
That's quite a view, Mr. Chairman. That's one way to view. I would quite disagree with that perspective. And here is why. For all those of us in the social sciences, in economics and many other social sciences, whose dream is for broad-based transformation and to end poverty in our generation, the reality of the matter is there is no alternative to economic growth. Every country that has made progress on gender upliftment, on poverty reduction, on youth, investment in youth, every single country from China to Malaysia to Indonesia to Vietnam to Brazil, nearly 36 million people out of poverty since 1994. Every single country that wants to make a permanent impact, not a single period or single period interventions. If we want to make permanent, to end poverty on a permanent basis, then the pathway to that, or the beginning of that, has to be economic growth. But to get economic growth, you must first have macroeconomic stability. No country can sustain growth without macroeconomic stability. So first things first, have macroeconomic growth, have macroeconomic stability, which becomes the basis for economic growth, sustained economic growth, not for 2 years, not 5 years, 10, 15, 20 years. Then you are able to reduce poverty on an ongoing basis. That's exactly how I view it.
We'll come back to that, Joseph. We'll come back to you on that. Let me. Hello, Joseph.
Yes, sir. Yes, you can go ahead.
Come back to you. Let me go to Janet now. The debate is on because basically the erosion of human capital in the country in the form of the health, the condition of health, facilities, education, which sector was a revolution in the 80s, has been eroded enormously. But let me ask Janet Jo to come in. Janet.
Thank you very much for this opportunity that you have given me to talk to this very important topic for me, but also for the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development and its friends. With regards, you're asking critical questions as to the obsession to the economic growth metrics that we have been using, where we look at the GDP, we look at issues of inflation, we call on governments around fiscal consolidation, ease of doing business and the like, but sometimes it does not make sense to the person who is on the ground, to the lived experiences of different demographics at community level, like women, people with disabilities, youths, and the like. So reading the IMF and the World Bank reports, and also the clip that you have shared from the minister, what we see are the notable progress that has been made, or that have been made within the macroeconomic context, particularly around reversing the economic recession, despite the different challenges, the enormous challenges that are highlighted in the reports, highlighted as well by Mr. Mverecha as he was making his presentation, that the challenges are really huge. There is some level of positive economic growth rates that has really reversed, or kind of reversed, the recession, and they are positive, definitely positive projections in terms of the economic growth. They also highlight, the great fiscal consolidation efforts that have been made by the authorities and the surplus that has therefore been recorded consecutively in 2019 and in 2020. This surplus, the minister has also spoken to it on quite a number of platforms and in quite a number of presentations that he has made, particularly to the parliament and to the citizens of Zimbabwe. We can come to the questions in terms of saying, where is the surplus? Where has it been targeted? What has it meant for people's lives and livelihoods that they are seeking to defend and to protect, particularly with the pandemic that we are facing and the different shocks it has caused, the challenges that it has caused. The other progress that they have highlighted and given a pat on the back for the fiscal authorities, for the authorities and the government in Zimbabwe is the ease of doing business. I think the mantra for this administration has always been Zimbabwe is open for business. They've gone through the ease of doing business. We now have an authority that's looking into this issue. But again, I think the main issue here is on opening for business for foreign direct investment. And I believe that those who are in business in Zimbabwe, they continue to face challenges, particularly transitioning from the informal sector to formality. So ease of doing business, once again, may not mean much to those that are in the informal sector, those that continue not to be supported without financial access, without policy support, for them to be able to operate, but actually may be facing, not even maybe facing harassment, demolition of the structures where they operate. There is progress on the inflation, and I won't repeat on that. And also they noted and gave a pat on the back around the dual currency, going back or reverting to the dual currency system, noting that the economy was not holding with the monocurrency context that had come, or policy that the government had adopted. But there are also challenges that they highlight, and these are mainly around the policy missteps, particularly on quasi-fiscal activities by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. The natural disasters, droughts, cyclones, the COVID-19, but also the slow progress on currency reforms or monetary reforms, the issue of low interest rates that kind of suppress then business, debt distress and lack of concessional external credit lines, low production and the like. So these are the challenges and the enormous challenges that that the economy is facing. On the human development front, I think the issue of extreme poverty is key. And facilitator, you have highlighted what the World Bank is saying in terms of extreme poverty. Half of the population of Zimbabwe lives in extreme poverty. And for me, these poverty statistics, they wear a certain face, which the reports have not really then gone deeper to identify those faces, to then proffer policy prescriptions that will ensure that those who wear the face of poverty are lifted up from poverty and are not left behind. So when I look at the 49% or the 7.9 million people that are in extreme poverty, I see a woman's face, I see a youth face, a child's face, a person with disability face, a cross-border, a vendor, and the different many other faces we live with on a daily basis. They highlight the widening inequalities, despite the prescriptions that we have gone through, the staff monitored program, the fiscal consolidation, what did they call it? The transitional stabilization program that we went through. They are widening inequalities. Despite the vision for being an upper middle income country, we see erosion of the purchasing power by 25% for those that are poor, but those that are rich, their purchasing power increasing by about 17%, which is typical for middle income economies, because they focus on economic growth and not human development growth and human development indexes. So in many times, you then leave quite a lot of people behind, because the assumption of the trickle-down effect does not actually exist or assist in uplifting livelihoods and living standards of the majority poor. But I wanted to say that on the widening inequalities, whilst I've spoken about the face of extreme poverty, those that as well are on the other side of the inequalities, the poor ones, they also wear the face. But the rich ones as well, they do have a face. Those that had their purchasing power increased by 17%. And those are the few political elite, the cartel that we have seen in Zimbabwe. I think there have been two very telling, very incisive reports to this issue. So only a few political elites are benefiting from these economic growth indicators that we are talking about, or that we are now seeing. So this is what brings in the question of who exactly is owning this wealth, who exactly is benefiting from this economic growth that we are talking about. Because on inequalities, the informal trader, the teacher, the nurse, the doctor had their purchasing power eroded during this period that we are talking about. We are talking about poor social service delivery, and we know that the poor depend on public services, but we don't have water, we don't have health, we don't have education, magnified immensely by the COVID-19 as well, the cyclones that we saw, the droughts and the like, but the limited as well social protection for the vulnerable is another key issue that is a major challenge, even in the context of the reports that we have received that showed the positive economic growth trajectory. On the prescriptions by these international financial institutions, they talk about the macroeconomic stability. And I think economists, every economist and everyone would want macroeconomic stability. They talk about public service delivery investments there in the health, education, social protection, food and the like, but also the abolishing of ineffective incentives and subsidies, to which I totally agree. This would definitely eliminate arbitrage, corruption in the sectors, as we have seen around the agricultural sector, around the fuel sector, the meal subsidies and the like, and how that has kind of promoted arbitrage. But for me, I think it's going then beyond just saying we are abolishing the ineffective incentives or subsidies. We have then to address what do we do with the 49% of the population that is in extreme poverty. Actually, the whole population at the end of the day, except for a few, means they are in poverty. So for me, it is a drive, I think, which we should go towards the basic income grant, for example. I don't think it will harm anyone to think and to begin to really talk about a basic income grant where half of the population lives in extreme poverty. Then we do away with subsidies and incentives that benefit only a few that are playing in all the sectors of the economy because maybe they're politically connected or the big businesses. So on these prescriptions, I just noted some gaps and some macroeconomic indicator deficits. And as I was just listening to the clip once again by the minister, the word that came to my mind as I was trying to really think about how to describe this economy, looking as well at the reports by the World Bank and the IMF, is, you know, it's as if we are in this schizophrenic economic growth where the interpretation of our economic growth and where we are seems so divorced from the reality, the lived realities of the people that are on the streets, that are in the economies. It's so abnormal. It's like, it's people that are talking of an economy somewhere, and it only makes sense maybe for the economists, it makes sense for the technocrats and the like, but does not relate to the daily lived experiences of the people. And I'm talking about this because we continue to talk about the economic growth metrics versus human development metrics without asking who owns our wealth, who is gaining from the material gains of this wealth, of this economic growth that we are talking about. I hear the economists, the authorities continuing to push for the green and bear it stance, where if it is not hurting, then it's not working. If the medicine is not bitter, then it does not work. I think being African, I relate to that, because any medicines, any herbs that we take, they really are bitter, and the bitterness describes how much that medicine works. But I want to believe that this is a singular approach that we are taking, and we are talking of decades of an economy that has been going down and run down and neglected. But at the same time, there can be a dual approach where the state plays its role, its mundane functions of ensuring that it gives self-sustenance and capacitates its citizens to be able to participate in the economy. It can play its role in the economy, its regulatory role in redistribution of wealth role, such that the pain and the tightening of belts is not only by the poor, it's not only by the ordinary citizens, while at least a few do not tighten their belts. And we tighten and we tighten, and we have to keep on grinning, and we are told that it's going to work. It's actually working. It's actually working when we continue to suffer. We see the austerity, the retrogressive policy taxation in Zimbabwe. The World Bank indicates that the 2% is a progressive taxation because mainly it's targeted at the urban population that uses mobile money than the rural. But for me, every Zimbabwean, there is the trend of urban poverty. People are in the informal sector, in the urban areas, and they are the ones who make use of the mobile money. So where is it progressive, such taxation? On that taxation as well, we see the citizens being taxed, but companies like Way, Great Dyke Mines are given tax incentives, harmful tax incentives if we are looking at raising revenue or our domestic resources, given the limited fiscal space, given the fact that we cannot access external credit and resources. So we have to depend on our domestic resources, but we give harmful tax incentives, while least we tax our citizens. So this is really a major issue and a major challenge. And on the policy missteps, I think we have to balance here. The balancing act, yes, fiscal hygiene, but we also need fiscal support because of where we are, and especially to the social sectors, so that we don't leave that rationalization on quasi-fiscal activities by the RBZ. So for me, it still falls on the fiscal authorities and on the fiscal policy as well. When we do our budgets, are we adequately budgeting? Are we adequately allocating resources to the sectors that are going to be likely to require resources after budgeting, such that then we have the quasi-fiscal activities that we are talking about. So our challenge is, for me, that the reports and the minister have not really addressed have to do with the crisis in and of the state. I think it's an issue of identity of our state, the capacity of our state, and the capture of the state, which these reports have not really addressed. It has not addressed the developmental versus the predatory state dichotomy that we have. Then there's the issue of the rule of law versus the rule by law. So we continue to have the rights deficit. We continue to have the economic and political reforms deficits that will ensure that we truly get on an economic recovery trajectory, or a democratic economic recovery trajectory that does not leave one aspect over another, or we end up having this rights light kind of economy. We don't look at human development per se. We don't look at issues of inequality and how to address them. We also have a crisis of the developmental model that we have to deal with, which leads us to the endangered future around the climate, around the food, around the finance. I will end, moderator, by talking about where do we go then as the citizens, because we definitely have a crisis of the state, we have a crisis of the developmental model, and an endangered future for the citizens. And for me, it goes to the issue of redefining our current challenges. And I want to talk about our own internal system that we have, particularly around the Auditor-General's reports. They highlight what our problems are. The prescription that we are getting around the macroeconomic context, without dealing with the real issues of corporate governance, the political reforms that we need to address corruption, to address public finance abuse, to address the pillage that we have seen, the illicit financial flows that we have seen. So the Auditor-General's reports, they clearly show us where we are losing our resources, why we have the inequalities that we have, why we have the extreme poverty that we have, because resources are leaking, and they are leaking simply because of the kind of politics that we have that continue, and the policies that we have that continue to only power a few political elites or those that are privileged and can play a role in the economy. So I think we need to deal with so there are issues of poor public sector governance, there's the issue of corruption and poor oversight. Exacerbated, we know that currently parliament is decimated, local authorities are decimated. So where do we get oversight? These are the real issues of governance, of administration that we have to deal with, and give prescriptions to over and above just the macroeconomic context, and diagnose our problems only as at macroeconomic level, without bringing in the political economy question that has taken us to where we are. I've referred to the reports, and I guess I'll end by talking to the issue of austerity that is only targeted at the majority of citizens and leaves those who are responsible for primitive accumulation, which will not lead us to any prosperity and to betterment of the underclass, who are the victims of the current development model that we see. And our government has to begin to think about creating decent jobs, has to think about maintaining our roads, our bridges, our social services. We have to talk about tackling inequality, discrimination and exclusion, poor service delivery and access to services, and have these accessed on equal terms by all citizens, be it land, be it property, be it assets, be it credit. And I will conclude by saying that we do not want, and we say no to jobless, ruthless, futureless, voiceless, ruthless economic growth that we are currently talking about. Thank you very much, moderator. I hand over the mic to you.
Thanks, Janet. I couldn't stop you. I just couldn't stop you. I found this most enthralling and really heart of the matter. Economic growth versus human development. That is the axis of your presentation. And thank you for the paper that you have put on the screen. We will, as you know, publish this in policy briefs, and we are going to hurry to put this out as soon as possible, this policy dialogue session. Now, I want to quickly move on to the next person. That is Zamchia. Please, Tezara, you may come in at once. I just wanted to say, while he's getting ready to come in, that he presented a very wonderful paper a few weeks ago on the Afrobarometer, and we have asked him to tweak that presentation of his to address the subject before us. I have no doubt that he will do it as ably as he has done the previous report. Zamchia.
Am I muted? Oh, thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, viewers. I am very privileged to be able to be on this platform tonight. So the title of my presentation tonight is IMF World Bank Reports versus the People's Verdict. I think Dr. Mandaza, Mr. Mverecha, and Madam Janet Jo, they have already made reference to the World Bank and IMF projections and the positives. And I have no doubt whatsoever that the former finance minister, Tendai Biti, will come back to that. So I will not repeat it. What I would like to do tonight is to widen the debate by weaving politics, economic growth, and wider development. So, why did the West support Mnangagwa in the first place? The West supported President Emerson Mnangagwa, a hardliner, to take over during the military coup because they thought he, one, could bring macroeconomic stability, which is conducive for foreign direct investments, cut financial deals with the business community in the West. To them, Mnangagwa understands the nuts and bolts of business capital. So the underlying philosophy was that you can actually have economic development without liberal democratization, just like in Zimbabwe and in other nations. So on Mnangagwa, some in the West still think they can do business with him. They can twist him to promote and entrench a development ideology based on World Bank and IMF templates, which favor capital, big business, and the rich in society. And they also think that he's the only option because the opposition is deemed weak and cannot wrestle the center of state power from ZANU-PF. It is therefore not surprising that the Minister of Finance has adopted hook, line, and sinker all the neoliberal policies despite Zimbabwe's extraordinary circumstances. And it is within this paradigm that the minister is fixated with GDP, inflation targeting, and declaring huge budget surpluses of 9.8 billion, whilst Zimbabweans are desperately poor. Mr. Mverecha made similar emphasis earlier on. So, even if we are to believe the IMF and World Bank's projections as substantiated by Mr. Mverecha's projections, I argue that it is not likely to lead to socio-economic development of the poor and vulnerable in a fragile political context and corrupt state like Zimbabwe. Janet Jo has gone further to say it is a captured state by cartels. And the statistics is already contradictory here. Mr. Mverecha is... Hello?
Carry on, Tizar, carry on.
So the statistics are already contradictory. Mr. Mverecha said 4.5%, IMF, I think 6%, World Bank 3.9%. If you call another neoclassical economist, they will give you another figure and so forth. But in African countries, we have seen that Nigeria, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, and Gabon, we are told that the GDP is constantly increasing and economic growth is rising. But the majority of citizens in these countries remain poor. And also, Mr. Mverecha talks about business perceptions being positive. But what are the ordinary people saying? I am not making ideological assertions. Recent national surveys held between 16 April and 1 May 2021 by Mupoi and on behalf of Afrobarometer shows some lived realities that are far detached from the surplus and economic growth hymn. Janet Jo emphasized this point. It's almost like the structural adjustment programs, and we know the consequences in the 1990s across Africa. And let us turn to the lived realities now. So the reflections on these findings, almost 3/4, 72% of Zimbabweans describe the country's economic condition as fairly bad or very bad. 67% of Zimbabweans say the country is going in the wrong direction. And the majority of the citizenry in the rural areas, 62%, actually feel that the country is going in the wrong direction. So in addition to the old wave of urban discontent that started in the 1990s, partly due to the structural adjustment programs from the same Bretton Woods institutions, there is a new wave of rural discontent building, and the urban-rural divide is narrowing. Even if we look at development as a basic human need, last year, most Zimbabweans went several periods without enough food, 52%, medicine, 55%, cash, 87%, clean water, 51%. So Janet Jo, my sister, you were talking about tightening belts, but as we can see, the poor have no belts in the first place to tighten. And let's also look at development as people's verdicts. Only 35% of Zimbabweans approve or strongly approve Mnangagwa's performance in the past 12 months. The lowest rating for his predecessor, Robert Mugabe, was 20% in 1999. And large majorities say the government is performing badly on creating jobs, 91%, keeping prices stable, 78%, but we are talking of inflation targeting here, improving living standards of the poor, 75%, and so forth. And this is striking because this loss of approval is also permeating to ZANU-PF's electoral strongholds in the rural areas. Only 44% approve of Mnangagwa's performance and 40% disapprove in the rural constituencies in the past 12 months. So even if you go to the Mashonaland provinces, the people are saying economic conditions are bad. It's above half, Mashonaland Central, East and West. And all the other 7 provinces have above 70% of people saying the economic condition is bad. And I think this is an important point that Janet Jo and my brother didn't address. We should also think of development as freedom, not just numbers. Because the core values of development must include self-esteem to be a person, and freedom and the right to choose. So constraints are not just about power at Wange, COVID-19, as important as they are. Listen, 45% of Zimbabweans say they are not very free or not at all free to say what they think. So are we having GDP numbers with mom people? You know, 79% say they often or always have to be careful about what they say regarding politics. 85% of women are unfree to talk about politics. People can't even freely join political organizations they want. And 30% of Zimbabweans are not free to vote. So let us now review the dream of economic growth without democratization, a narrative that I see that it's being resuscitated in the context of these reports and in the context also of this debate. I want to emphasize that the dream of economic growth without democratization, as perhaps happened in Rwanda or China and many other parts of the world, will not be sustainable in Zimbabwe for 4 primary reasons, and they are political. First, there is a competitive opposition MDC party in Zimbabwe. The official, ZEC results actually show us polarization. I don't think Nelson Chamisa is going to be quiet. I don't think Tendai Biti, I know him as a warrior, is not going to exhaust all means to fight. And you can't wish away the fact that there's a competitive opposition in Zimbabwe. The second, there is a legitimate and active civil society. The third, the effects of the post-2000 pro-democracy movement should not be understated. Democracy as a form of governance was consistently and ideologically drilled in the masses for the past 2 decades. All surveys tell you Zimbabweans yearn for democracy. And fourth, you have the digitally connected diaspora and its influence on modes of governance. So it is a dream that is not likely to be realized in Zimbabwe. Meanwhile, the crisis is on. Whilst there are efforts to paint Zimbabwe as Africa's rising giant, the reality is that citizens in urban and rural areas have converged to acknowledge that there's a protracted political and economic crisis, which a ZANU-PF government alone cannot resolve. This is why 73% of Zimbabweans are calling for a national dialogue that extends beyond political parties to include businesses, churches, and civil society. This can be kickstarted by a national, regional, or international conference. But what is striking is that, in fact, more rural residents, 76%, than urbanites, 68%, are supportive of an all-inclusive national dialogue. So given the dire economic situation, some voices from below are even calling for more radical responses. This is a situation that Mutuli, World Bank, and IMF must be wary of, and they are believers. I quote an MDC Alliance MP who said 2 weeks ago, there are people who are saying, maybe it is time for us to learn from the struggles of the past, where they ended up coming with Umkhonto weSizwe in South Africa, Zanla and Zipra in Zimbabwe. For now, I do not think we have reached that stage where we can talk about armed resistance to the regime, military intervention. But who knows, in the future, it might happen. I do not want to spoil the positive mood, but a model of economic growth without democracy will not apply to the Zimbabwean context. At best, this can be temporary benefits. For example, where will you get the sustained economic growth we were talking about when general elections are pronounced in the next 18 to 24 months? Just one example. So the citizens' high demand for dialogue is legitimate and urgent. It can take many forms as a starting step to address deep and structural political and economic problems for a sustainable solution. I think that will be better than technical fixes, thinking that they will sustainably change the majority's livelihoods. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Need I say any more? Thank you very much. I think I don't even want to ask any questions at this stage. I want to move to the next speaker, Tendai Biti. Please, sir. I think Zamchia has put it all out there.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Zamchia. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Dr. Mverecha. Thank you, Sekuru Ibo. Yeah, so the starting point I want to make is that this is Zimbabwe in 2021, and we keep on getting stuck in the same lane for decades, we have had these debates before. And I remember particularly in 2014 and in 2015, when it appeared that Chinamasa was pushing the economy after the World Bank annual meetings in Lima, Peru, on the 8th of October, 2015, when the entire international community, with the possible exception of the United States government, lock, stock, and barrel, supported the program for debt relief that Chinamasa was pushing. And some of us at the time argued that you cannot have economic reform without political reform, and that in any event, you can never have purported economic reform without reformers. We argued at the time that ZANU was a fascist organization incapable of reforms. We argued at the time that in any event, no class commits suicide, and that ZANU-PF will never commit political suicide by reforming itself out of power. So it appears that we are back to that same matrix where there is a naive assumption, a dishonest assumption, particularly on the part of the IMF, because they are so well vested in Zimbabwe's recent economic history. The assumption that a purely economic centrist approach can A, actually achieve normative growth and change, and B, can actually build a sustainable Zimbabwe. The kind of talk that I heard from my friend, Dr. Mverecha, it is fiction. Zimbabwe is mired in a political crisis. And since 2017, we have seen the massive rise in authoritarian consolidation, as it were. We've seen the total takeover of our country by the securocrats, by the military. They are in every government department. They're in every parastatal. They're in every policy-making decision. At least under Mugabe, there was a veneer of a semblance of civilian authority. Under Emerson, it doesn't exist. You see massive reproduction of authoritarian consolidation and authoritarian manifestations every day. We've seen an increase in violence. 8 people were shot dead on the 1st of August, 2018. 19 people were killed in January of 2019. Since then, there's been a spate of abductions. There's an increased use of and weaponization of the law. Simple things like bail applications have been weaponized. Civic society activists are denied bail. Journalists like Wopo Chingono have spent months in prison. Jeffrey Moyo, the New York Times correspondent, has spent weeks in prison. Young Makomborero Aruzuvishe, 24 years of age, he has spent 60 days in prison. People like those lovely young girls, Joanna Mamombe, Cecilia Chimbiri, Netsai Marova, he has spent at least 6 months in prison in the last 12 months. COVID has been weaponized. COVID is being used as a means of denying political expression to citizens. We are denied the right to freedom of expression, freedom of movement in the name of COVID regulations, but they themselves are carrying out political activities. They're having primary elections. They're choosing their candidates. They're having public meetings. Those sections of the community that are deemed loyal to them are allowed to have activities. There are thousands and thousands of members of the Joan Masowe sect that are gathered in Bocha Marange right now as I'm talking to you. Thousands and thousands of them. Yet every other citizen is proscribed. There is a formal and sustained attack on the MDC. Through a dubious court judgment, we have lost members of parliament, we have lost councils, we've lost our own head office. So all these things are happening under Emmerson Mnangagwa in the past 3 years. And it's not just the political movement. Huge communities are being displaced. I act for a community in Chulonga, Cherezi, where thousands and thousands of villagers face threat of being ejected from their ancestral homes to make way for a grass project to be done by one of Emerson's colleagues. Billy Rottenberg, one of the most notorious characters in Zimbabwe, wants to evict thousands and thousands of peasants in Chipinge to make way for his sugarcane in project. In Wange, Matabeleland North, mining by the Chinese is being allowed in a national park with thousands of animals. And the communities, the Dinde communities, the Numbia Dinde communities are being ejected and displaced to make way for Chinese mining ventures. In the past few weeks, we've seen hundreds of homes being destroyed without court orders by this regime. We've seen informal sectors like CSO being destroyed without court orders by this regime. So in that context of a nefarious fascist state that is implementing authoritarian consolidation, it is fiction to talk about any growth. It is fiction to talk about any sustainable recovery. It actually becomes pathological. When you watch the interview between Mthuli Ncube and Richard Quest, the lies are pathological. The man needs treatment from experts because it's not normal. He's talking about a Zimbabwe which none of us relate to. And it's dangerous for someone to lie without blinking, someone to lie without, I grew up in a culture where you must have shame. But Mutuli and ZANU-PF, they are what T.S. Eliot called the hollow men, people without conscience, people without guilty, people without elasticity, people that are totally shameless. And when a state is taken over by this dangerous group of people, it reminds me of the Third Reich and Hitler. There are no limits. And I suggest that that is the biggest problem that we are facing in Zimbabwe at the present moment. But let me get technical. Let me get technical now. The government is saying that its projected growth rate in 2021 is going to be 7%. The IMF has not produced a report. We keep on referring it to a report. They didn't produce a report. They produced a press statement on the 16th of June, 2021. But that press statement was naive and dishonest. It reminded me of IMF reports that used to be issued in 2014, 2015, and 2016 by an IMF chief known as Dominic Faniza, who later on left the IMF and joined the African Development Bank. Those reports were so dishonest and so dangerous, they sounded like they'd been written and authored at the ZANU-PF head office. It looks like we are now back to that same level of naivety by the IMF. So you have a group of people, and I don't think Gura, the lead economist, has actually ever been to Zimbabwe. So they conduct Zoom interviews by Zim officials. They conduct Zoom interviews with Zimbabweans carefully selected by the local office, which has been aiding and abetting this dishonest. And then suddenly they're experts on Zimbabwe and they can write a report on Zimbabwe. This is typical decades of IMF intervention on the African continent, which has been consistent with siding with autocrats, which has been consistent with siding with an anti-democratic agenda. If you trace the 70s, the 80s, constantly they were writing reports oblivious to the atrocities of people like Embara John Bokassa, Sonny Obacha stealing billions in Nigeria, the various Ugandan governments from Milton Obote, Idi Dada Amini, now Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who just, by the way, only last week got $1 billion loan from the IMF, despite the atrocities and electoral disputes in Uganda. So it appears that the IMF particularly under the new managing director, Georgina Christina. At least Christine Lagarde was smart and streetwise. And I think it's because she had more experience of Africa. The new regime at the IMF is naive. It's extremely naive, mendacious, and dishonest. So we're back to the old days that they're desperate for success stories. They will do anything legally and extra legally to prop up these regimes. Now, the assumptions around the 7% growth rate is number one, a decent agricultural season, according to the IMF. Number two, an increase in the energy sector, output in the energy sector. Number three, an increase in construction. That's their assumption. Now let's revisit these issues. Agriculture now plays an insignificant contribution to GDP. Its own share of GDP has shrunk from a period where downstream agriculture used to contribute 35% of GDP. Agriculture now actually contributes 8% of GDP. So even assuming you had a 50% growth in agriculture, its contribution, its multiplier is very limited because it's a small item on the aggregates that feed in to our GDP. But we know that at most there will be 1.5 million tons to 1.7 million tons of maize that will be delivered to the GMP this year. They will call it a bumper harvest, but I know a bumper harvest because I've lived through one under President Mugabe. You are talking of 3 million tons, you're talking of 3.2 million tons. And remember, Malawi, with the less than 1/5 of the resources, has got 3.5 million tons this year. That's a bumper harvest. So, but let's give it to them, 2 million tons of maize. That doesn't qualify to be called a bumper harvest. But yes, it will help people. It will help people because our people, the producers of maize, are subsistence. So life will be better in 2021 than in 2020. There's no question about that. But that's a growth even of 25% in agriculture can then spare a GDP overall disaggregated growth rate of 6% or 7% is fiction. And the experts in the IMF ought to know that. They are intelligent, educated economists in the IMF. I once worked with them. They ought to know that. They speak about the growth in electricity as one of the justifications of a 7% growth rate. We have now become a blackout capital of South Africa. In the last 3 weeks alone, we have hardly had any electricity. And the reasons are very simple. There's hardly anything that is coming from Hwange 1 to 6. Hwange 1 to 6 installed capacity is 2,000 megawatts. Less than 300 megawatts is coming from Hwange. So you are now left with the Kariba. Installed capacity of Kariba is 700. With the low water levels in the last 2 years, it has been producing 200, 300 megawatts. The water levels are high this year, so expect 600. But 600 megawatts out of installed capacity of 2,000 megawatts is a joke. And in fact, it's shrinking. So Zimbabwe's electricity, the electricity we are having now, we're actually importing from the South Africans and from HBC Kabora Basa. So it's a fiction and dishonest to think that GDP growth rate can be spared by electricity. The third basis for the growth, according to the IMF, is increase in construction. Again, another fiction. Yes, there is demand of cement by people building the same houses that are being destroyed. But there's no gross capital formation in Zimbabwe. When was the last time you saw a crane? There's been no gross capital formation in the last 40 years. If you wake up someone who died in 1968 and you put him in Harare today, he won't get lost. What will confuse him is where there was Jameson Avenue, there is now Samora Machel. Where there was Moffat Avenue, there's now Leopold Takawira. There's not been any gross capital formation that is so significant to justify an increase in construction that will justify a rapid growth in GDP of 6%, 7%. So the question is, where are they getting the 6%? Because what I'm doing here is being technical. And I'm saying there is no basis for the growth of 6%, 7%. The World Bank says 3.9%. I ask where? So if you ask me, yes, a modest growth is there because of agriculture. But if it's beyond 2%, it's a miracle. We must all go to church and pray and thank God, very much. Yes, 2021 will be better than 2020 because of the better agricultural citizen. The citizens are able to feed. I'm spending a lot of time in the rural areas. I can see it, it's visible. But to then translate that into a 7% growth rate, that's fiction of the highest order. That is only peddled by pathological liars. And there are many around, including in Washington, D.C., in Pennsylvania Street, to be particular. So let me come to the other noises by the IMF. Number one, they speak about a surplus. I'm going to speak about that. Number two, they speak about the government containing broad money, again fiction. Then they speak about exchange rate stability. Now, look, let me start with the exchange rate. The elephant in the room will always be the government's mismanagement of the exchange rate. The attempt to de-dollarize has been an absolute failure. As a historian, there is no country in the world that has involuntarily dollarized, that has been able to de-dollarize, because what makes involuntary dollarization takes place is not the genius of a government, it's the citizen who rejects to a currency that becomes a means, an instrument of arbitrage. The Zimbabwean dollar was caught in flagranto by its own citizens in 2007, 2008. People lost faith in the Zimbabwean dollar. And when we came in as the government of national unity and introduced the regime of multiple currencies, it was not because we were geniuses. It was simply because we recognized that the public themselves had lost confidence in their own currency. So where there's a broken down, and remember, economics is 40% technicality, 60% is confidence, is trust, is the social contract. So people don't have trust in the ZANU-PF government. People don't have trust in the Reserve Bank. People don't have trust in John Panonetsa Manguda. People don't have trust in their currency, in the Zimbabwean dollar. And this is what Dr. Zamchia was trying to talk about, that the reality on the ground is tangential to the statements of dishonesty by the IMF, to Mutuli's pathological regular statements. The essence of the Afrobarometer is a citizen that has lost total control in the ability of the state to look after itself. A citizen that feels he's left on its own. So with the Zimbabwean dollar, there is total mismanagement on two levels. Number one, you are maintaining a rigged auction system. The auction system since June of 2020, when it was introduced, has been averaging in a straight line of 1:83 to the US dollar. Now, if you were to compare stronger currencies, compare the movement of the rand to the dollar, compare the movement of the pound to the dollar, compare the movement of the euro to the dollar, compare the movement of the rupee to the dollar, compare the movement of the Chinese renminbi to the dollar, it's been volatile, ups and down. And these are stronger currencies and stronger economies. I left the Nigeria naira. But ours has been in a straight line because it's rigged. And the reason why it's rigged is that it's not an auction. It's not an auction. There is no free market there. Anyone with his own money can't go and sell. The only person who is selling money is the Reserve Bank. So the Reserve Bank will sell its own money at any price that it wants. And to maintain fictional stability, it has maintained it at around 82, 83, and so forth for the past 12 months. But so you can't call it an auction. So the premium now, the difference between the parallel market rate which is thriving, which is alive and kicking, and the official exchange rate is now a factor of more than 60%. The US dollar on the open street is trading at around US 1:150. The US dollar on the artificial exchange rate is trading at US 1:84. But there's now arbitrage now, thanks to statutory instrument 127 of 2021. There is now an arbitrage because poor people who are the majority of our country, the World Bank says 50%, it's not 50%. 79% of Zimbabweans are living in extreme poverty, surviving on less than US $1.25 a day. We know it as Zimbabweans, we call it sauna. You survive on a little cock of cooking fat, 4 leaves of vegetables, and half a plate of mealie meal. That's how our people are surviving in Lotito, in Chendambuya, in Ngai, in Cholocho, in Zvaresekwa, in Makokova. You know it. I know it because we are Zimbabweans. So what is now happening, thanks to SI 127, the poor people will trade. They'll go on the black market and buy the US dollar, or they receive remittances from their relatives abroad and obtain money at a premium of US $1.50. But they go into a supermarket where that money, they are going to exchange it at $185 on the basis of prices which have been indexed by these shops at the black market rate of US $1.50. So they are suffering twice, which is why the artificial rigged exchange rate has now become a means of transferring wealth from the poor to the rich. And remember, this is the same population that has lost its pensions as a result of SI 33 of 2020, that has lost its salaries as a result of SI 33 of 2020. Before SI 33 of 2019, a civil servant used to earn US $500, an average civil servant. As a result of the artificial de-dollarization, that same civil servant is now earning around $35, which is why in the last 2 years, there's hardly been any teacher who has gone to work, which is why in the last 2 years, there's hardly been any nurse who has reported for duty. Only last week, teachers and nurses were burning their pay slips because they're earning peanuts. You know that, I know that, because they're not earning real wages. So Mthuli Ncube speaks of a surplus where he, through manipulation of the exchange rate, he has devalued by a factor of over 85% people's wages, people's savings, people's salaries. So the net effect of mismanaging the exchange rate is that we now have 4 parallel economies that are existing in this economy. 4. The first one is the official US economy, which trades at 1:85, where the elites exist because they go on the auction, use their connection to the Reserve Bank, and obtain money at US 1:85, which they then sell in the streets of Harare. But that economy is there, the economy that trades in the US, official US dollar economy. Then there's a second economy, which is the unofficial US dollar cash economy. That's where the majority of us are. If you search any Zimbabwean, you'll have $2, $5, $10 US, which we use to kia, as I used to say, which we used to survive by the day. Then you have the mobile money economy, the eco cash economy. Again, different rules apply in that economy. Again, different rates apply in that economy. Then you've got the fourth economy, which is the RTGS economy, the bank transfer economy. Where you do bank transfer, a different exchange rate applies. There's a different market for that, and it's a different economy. So you cannot have stability. You cannot talk of stability where you have got a totally disfigured macroeconomic environment in which 4 economies are actually surviving side by side. And for the IMF to then say there's economic stability in Zimbabwe, it eludes my wisdom, whatever little wisdom that I have. Then there's the fiction of contained broad money supply, M3. Only in June alone, broad money supply rose to $24 billion. And we know the Reserve Bank is printing money. Only yesterday, they introduced a new note, a new $50 note. Why would you introduce a $50 note from $20 to $50 unless you are printing money? So the fiction of not printing money and stabilizing broad money supply is fiction. And for me, for this to come from the IMF, I find it totally unacceptable because they know better. They've got experts, but they want to feed into this narrative of recovery, of stability, because they're desperate of success, success stories. But Zimbabweans get worried about money supply because we know what money supply does. When you increase money supply and there's too much money chasing too few goods, there's inflation. There was a year that we were all billionaires in Zimbabwe. There was a year that we were all trillionaires in Zimbabwe, but we were poor trillionaires. The last note that the central bank printed in 2008 was a $100,000 trillion note, and it couldn't buy you 2 bottles of soda. So we've been rich before. We've been richer than America, but we were poor. So we know the consequences of abusing money supply, abusing M2, abusing M3. Then there's a talk of surplus. Now, when you look at surpluses, you must look at 2 things. Number 1, the extreme retrenchment by this government, the extreme austerity, the extreme retrenchment by this government on social expenditure and social capital. We have had a COVID pandemic. Despite Mtuli's lies, there is not a single household in Zimbabwe that has received a cash payment. Yet in his COVID intervention of April last year, there was the 18 billion package. There was money that was provided for cash handouts. As a lawyer, I actually went to court representing poor people to say, but where is the money? Give us the handouts. And of course, the government was not upcoming. So there's been physical retrenchment. The 2020 budget was only funded to the tune of 36%. So how can someone claim a surplus, a physical surplus, when health is not being funded? Nurses are not going to work. Doctors are leaving the country. And one of the things that the Minister of Health has actually done is to devalue the health degree by removing certain courses so that our young doctors are not marketable in the UK, Australia, South Africa, where they've been going to. So they're devaluing the quality of that degree. Nurses have not been going to work. There are no teachers. Teachers have not been going to work. So there's a massive cut in social expenditure. So the surplus is a fiction. So when you read the IMF statement measured against this, it's crazy, it's ridiculous, because it has no relation to this to our economy. It's pathological, really, the disconnect between reality and fiction. But there's another elephant in the living room, which the World Bank does not mention, which the IMF does not mention, which is corruption in this country. And corruption fits into surplus, to the theory of surplus and the theory of budget deficits. Because the semblance of stability is being hid by the massive levels of corruption that are being done through the quasi-fiscal activities at the Reserve Bank and in other sectors of the economy that I'm talking about. So if you look at 2017, the Auditor-General's reports of 2.7 billion US dollars being stolen through Treasury, through the Ministry of Finance. The budget that year was $3 billion. So you've got $3 billion, then you've got an official deficit, then 2 years later, the Auditor General's report comes and says you stole $2.7 billion. 2018, $3.5 billion was stolen. 2019, which is the report that was released 2 weeks ago, $7.6 billion US dollars was stolen. So 2017, 2018, 2019, 3 years of the Emerson Mnangagwa regime, around 13 billion US dollars has been stolen. Now, I've been finance minister before. And thanks to the infrastructure of accountability that was left by the British in the Ministry of Finance, you can't steal a pen, you can't requisition a pen. There are like 4 signatures that are required. There are serious checks and balances that were there. And remember, the Ministry of Finance is an oversight ministry. Yes, you are a line ministry, but you are also a gatekeeper. So I fail to understand how the gatekeeper becomes the gatecrusher. I fail to understand how the Ministry of Finance can be at the center of the kleptocracy of $2.7 billion 2017, $3.5 billion 2018, $6.7 billion, sorry, $7.6 billion 2019. And remember, pending before Parliament right now, as I'm talking to you, is a bill called the Financial Adjustment Bill. In the Financial Adjustment Bill, the government is seeking condonation of $10.6 billion US, which they stole between 2015 and 2017. So add the $13 billion to the $10.6 billion US. So you've got what I call a kakistocratic state, a rogue state, a state that steals. Now this puts a premium. This debunks any notion that there can be growth in Zimbabwe. There can be growth when the economy has now been transferred in the hands of cartels. The recent report by the Sendri organization on Kudata Gwirei, on Sekunda, and other thugs like Billy Rottenberg, like John Bredenkamp, like Nick van Woesterstraat, like Hamish Radlett, Kenneth Royden-Sharp. The economy is run by mafia. So, and the key distinction feature between Emerson and Mugabe is the emergence of this cartel economy that is bleeding Zimbabwe high, smuggling of gold, the passing out of platinum concessions to the Russians through GDI investments, the passing out of chrome concessions to the Chinese. It's a mafia state. It's a rogue state. So it's in that context. It's a fiction to talk of growth. It's fiction to talk of any sustainable recovery. So to put it very crudely, as long as this country does not resolve the political challenges, and as long as we don't have as long as we have a government that steals like this one, we're going nowhere. What are the solutions? Number one, there must be a resolution of the political crisis. There must be dialogue in this country to avoid an implosion, to create a soft landing. So there must be a national transitional authority to oversee the transition from the current morass to a matrix of hope and stability. Number two, there must be an urgent economic a transition program that must focus on the following things. Number one, the restoration of the regime of multiple currencies. If we are going to keep our local dollar, which I guess is possible, then let's remove any controls on the exchange rates. Let's have a market, an exchange rate that is market determined. That is possible. That is possible. Other countries, Kenya, they're doing it. Ghana, they're doing it. They're doing it. Number two, let's ring-fence savings and pensions. You can't have a country which doesn't have pensions. You can't have a country which doesn't have savings. Successful countries, including China, they've grown on the basis of savings that are at least 25% of GDP. Zimbabwe is the only country in the world where you put your money, 2 years later, it's gone. It has been eaten by bank charges. So you can't have an economy without savings. You can't have an economy without pensions. Number three, the social agenda. The social agenda. At least 30% of the budget must go to the social agenda because our people are suffering. People are suffering. People living with disabilities, people living with the diseases, chronic diseases, HIV, AIDS, now there's COVID. So the state needs to have handouts. $30 US per month, it's possible. Other countries are doing it. Social grants are needed. Social safety nets are needed. There has to be massive reinvestment in education. There has to be massive reinvestment in health and so forth. Number four, we must resolve the debt crisis. The debt crisis is putting a premium on our economy. We need at least 30 billion US dollars in the next 5 years to fix our roads, to fix the power sector that I've been speaking about, to fix our dams and so forth. So that means that we must make peace with the IMF, we must make peace with the World Bank. So it means we need an upper tier staff monitored program with the tough quantitative and qualitative targets, a real reform that will focus on wage sector reform, that will focus on retrenching unnecessary expenditure, that will focus on competitiveness, ease of doing business, and so forth. Number 5, corruption. This is the elephant in the living room. This is the elephant in the living room. Corruption is putting a tax, a premium on our country, and I reckon from my own calculations that we are losing at least 80% of every dollar. 80 cents of every dollar is going to corruption. And under President Emmerson Mnangagwa, it has been accelerated and accentuated. And besides the formal corruption that we are talking about, we need to do with the scourge of illicit financial flows out of Zimbabwe. Africa loses $86 billion in illicit financial flows. And of that $86 billion, Zimbabwe is contributing $3 billion. So corruption, illicit financial flows is something that we have to come down hard on. The other things, gross capital formation, they speak for themselves. But as I said before, the precondition for all of this is political reform. We must stop killing each other. We must stop stealing elections. We must stop raping women. We must stop harassing little children like Joanna Mamombe, Cecilia Chimpiri, and so forth. We must stop arresting journalists like Wopo Chingono and others. In other words, we must restore the social contract first as a precondition to economic resolution. And lastly, we must stop lying. Why do you lie? And I'll stop here, Several members. Deny. Thanks very much. Thanks, Tendai. I don't want to summarize. I got some people waiting there. Can I have my discussions ready? Tony Hawkins, Todd Moss, Tony Hawkins, are you ready? Richard Mahomba, Tony. Who of the 3 that I've mentioned is ready? Tony Hawkins, Todd Moss.
Ibo, I'm happy to go if Tony's not ready.
Let's put it. Come in,
okay,
Todd.
Great to see you, Ibo, and thank you for convening such a great talk. I know everybody's been on staring at Zoom for a long time, so I'm going to be exceedingly brief. I'll just make three quick points. One is there's obviously a high degree of cognitive dissonance over what is going on in the Zimbabwean economy. Some of the GDP figures look okay. Obviously, the country is suffering tremendously and poverty is getting worse. I don't think we have to get derailed in ideological debates about whether GDP growth is necessary or not. The reality is that by whether you use that as a measure or not, Zimbabwe is actually in a pretty terrible situation. Even if you get 4% growth this year and maybe 6 or 7% growth, you're going back at best to where you were in 2018, which was way less than where you were in 1980. So the headroom has got to be much better. I mean, I'm sitting here in the United States. We should be growing slowly because we're already a wealthy economy. The convergence you'd expect from emerging economies like Zimbabwe, we're going to grow at 7% this year, and inflation is going to be between 2 and 3%. So Zimbabwe, if it was really recovering, we would see the figures that we saw when Tendai Biti was finance minister, which is you'd see 10 to 15% growth, which is what you'd expect for an economy like Zimbabwe that was actually growing. I also think it's ridiculous to tout lucky rains as a driver of growth, because the luck can go the other way. Zimbabwe is, if anything, at greater threat to future droughts. So it's great that you're having good rains this year, but that's not something you would give anybody credit for. So I actually think the economic situation is actually pretty bad. The second point is that the IMF and World Bank, they are smart people, but they are naive. And you must remember that this is these are both international organizations of which the government of Zimbabwe is a shareholder. And so they treat, which means they are an owner of those institutions, a partial owner, very small, but they are partial owners, and they are treated like owners of those institutions. So the organization will talk in very diplomatic terms about how well their members are doing. And also the staff of those organizations face very strong incentives to engage with all of their members, and people get promoted by pushing loans out the door. Nobody is ever promoted by stopping a bad program. So all of the incentives are to be optimistic, to whitewash the problems in Zimbabwe, and to push forward. So that's why we keep seeing these repeated references to recovery that seem utterly ridiculous and detached from reality. But that's where we are. And then just my very last point, and Dr. Zamchia, I think, made an excellent point in highlighting Equatorial Guinea as a potential negative model for Zimbabwe. Now we heard from the finance minister that Zimbabwe is open for business, but we now have 3 reports, all very well sourced. We have the Maverick newspaper report, we have the ARC report, and we now have the Century report, which all point in one direction, that Zimbabwe is not open for business, that Zimbabwe is actually increasingly being looted by a very small circle of politically well-connected people. And that's partially explaining why you could have headline growth figures that don't look terrible, but most people are suffering. That is exactly moving in a direction like Equatorial Guinea, where a very small number of people own everything of value in the country, and the vast majority of people get nothing and they suffer. And I think it's very important for the Zimbabwean civil society and for journalists to keep pointing out this disparity between the headline figures and the reality of what's going on between the government and the cartels. Zimbabwe's government is not like most governments around the world. It's much closer to an organized criminal enterprise. And that's now evident from those 3 reports. And just my last thing I would say is, if there are any enterprising journalists on this call, I think it would be really useful for someone to go through in detail all 3 of those reports and pull them together, because they're actually tackling different parts of the puzzle of what's going wrong in Zimbabwe, not only to try to stop the bleeding now, but because at some point in the future, hopefully the near future, all of those assets will have to be recovered for the Zimbabwean people. And these reports and others that will come will be important pieces of evidence for that effort. So let me stop there. And thank you again, Sekuru.
Thanks, Todd. Always good to have you here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Tony Hawkins, are you ready? Tony? Tony,
I'm here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. I'm glad to follow Todd, because I think Todd said pretty much most that needed to be said in this context. I think I would be a little more defensive of the IMF World Bank position. I think this latest IMF report, if you compare it with the Article 4 one they did early last year, you have to bear in mind that it was a completely new team. It was a bunch of guys sitting in Washington talking on telephones and Zoom machines who didn't come here. They were reliant on mostly the information they were getting from official quarters here. I think, I'm not making excuses. I'm merely stating, I think, the reality. The GDP numbers that have been discussed at some length this evening, I don't think they're worth the paper they're written on to a great extent. We know that there has been a World Bank or technical assistance team helping with the compilation of revised figures. We're told these are going to come out probably end of next month. Whether they will be any better, who knows? I'm certainly not holding my breath. But the discussion we've had in the course of the evening has highlighted the huge discrepancy between GDP numbers and the reality on the ground. I'll give you just an excellent example of what happened in 2020 during the pandemic. We find that the official figures show a very small reduction in the contribution of education to GDP. But we know that schools were closed for half the year. We know that something like, we're now told, 23% of school kids dropped out of school. So the figure is obviously nonsensical. And the same is true for the public sector in terms of government, where for a long period of time, something like 80% of the workforce was not reporting for work. So how could output have only fallen by such a small amount? So I'm very cynical about that lot. What one item hasn't been mentioned, and that is the forthcoming SDR allocation to Zimbabwe, which is of course a general SDR allocation to all members of the IMF. Now this, I'm told, is going to be close to $1 billion. And the big question then will be, there'll be no conditions attached to it. The big question, I think, is going to be, how is that money going to be used? Is it going to be used to support this so-called auction, which is, Tendai pointed out, is certainly not an auction. You don't have an auction where the aim of the seller is to sell for the lowest possible price. So is it going to be used for that? Is it going to be used to compensate farmers? Is it going to be used to support government spending in non-social priorities? Obviously, the intention of the fund would be that the money should be spent to alleviate the impact of the pandemic. And we'll see. But the fact of the matter is that the government will have the right to do what it likes with this money because there'll be no conditionalities attached to it. I'd just make one final point. I found this whole session deeply depressing, partly because of the dialogue of the deaf, which I think was shown by what Joseph said at the beginning and what speakers have said since. And I think that to me was a depressing aspect. People talking about national transitions and so on, all of which would be desirable. But I keep coming back to the point that has bothered me for some years now, and that is that after the period of the GNU, when the GNU had done so much to rebuild the economy and to get it back on its feet, the electorate went off and voted for the government that had brought the economy to its knees. And it seems to me that the same will happen again and again. I'm sorry to sound so pessimistic, but I'm afraid it's been going on for such a long time that it's very difficult to be optimistic. Thanks, Ibo.
Thank you on that pessimistic note. I'll take just anyone else. Mahomva is still there. Is there anybody else wants to speak?
Yeah, I'm
Before I
here.
ask- Yeah,
I'm here.
Mahomva,
Yeah, I'm
briefly,
here.
please. Okay.
Yeah,
Comrade,
thanks.
come in.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Good talk. And I think the main observation that I made really is that there is a resonating and very emotive position, which poses a very important
We can't hear you. Richard. Mahomva. 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 I think it's some problems.
Yeah, he's broken up.
Broken. Okay. I'll have to now regrettably bring this to the end and just ask each one.
Which says,
Oh,
how do we disband the 2020?
Richard, you have problems, huh? With your connection. Richard? Sorry, Richard. Sorry, Richard, sorry. Let me start with Joseph, your last few words.
Thank you,
Joseph.
thank you, thank you, Convener. Predictably, I will certainly not delve into politics, being very much an amateur in that area, and it is an area of experts. But just speaking on the economic issues, one thing I want to point out is that we are aware of all the macroeconomic challenges that we have faced over the past 2 decades or so. Nearly 46% decline in the economy, in cumulative GDP decline from around 1997, since the crisis of 14 November 1997 through to 2008. And it's in excess of a decade of decline, continuous decline. And over the past 2-3 years has been highlighted, significant decline compounded by supply side factors as well. That, in my view, cannot be corrected in a single year's growth. Even if we were to have 15% growth that colleagues are highlighting, or 14 or 18, it would not be able to correct half a decade, 10 years and a half, a decade and a half of economic decline. It goes back to the issue I pointed at the beginning. Do we want to achieve the issues, the social indicators, the human development indicators that are being pointed out by colleagues here, the growth to the exclusion of jobs, social investment in education and health? All of us who want to see, for example, electricity in Zviambi, Zhipani, and Zhamapere, all of us who want to see our young children going to school and not having to walk barefoot 10 kilometers to the Medza Primary School or Chimedza Primary School. All of us who want to see medicines in hospitals. All of us who want to see teachers going back again to schools the way it used to happen in the 1980s when I was in high school and secondary school. It's not going to be achieved in a year. It has to take, as has happened in Brazil, as has happened in Vietnam, I could go on and on in China. It will take 5-10 years of continuous successive growth that must be compounded on a cumulative basis to begin to make a difference on per capita incomes, on the living standards of people, on household incomes. It's like a tide. A tide lifts all boats in the harbor, whether they are small boats or they are medium-sized boats or they are big ships. The tide lifts everyone. So the key and the first step is, without macroeconomic stability, which I think my colleague Dr. Zamchia refers to as neoliberal songs new Keynesian economics. But without macroeconomic stability as the first step, there is no other road. It's like Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. There is no other road to making conditions for our people better, for accumulation of gross fixed capital formation, investment in social services, in health, in education, investment in key sectors of the economy, in infrastructure. You cannot achieve that on a sustainable basis unless you begin the first step of macro stability. Neoliberal, or whichever way we call it, that is the first step. And I would end with that, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks,
I do acknowledge, however, that many of the points that are being raised here, we must look at social indicators as well. We must not just confine ourselves to do statistics and numbers. People are important. But to do that, the first step is macro stability, low and stable inflation, single-digit inflation, sustained for 10 years, for 15, for 20 years, the way Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Botswana have achieved. That is the first step.
Thanks, Joseph. Thanks very much for your contribution today, and welcome to the club. Good having you. You're now part of our club. Thank you so much for your contribution. And as I said earlier on, your contribution will be, of course, it was recorded. It's on Facebook. It's on YouTube, and we'll be transcribing this into a policy brief carrying your name. Thanks very much, Joseph. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Janet.
Thank you,
my dear Janet.
Yes, thank you, Sekuru. So my parting shots are that Zimbabwe, when we're looking at the solutions, we need a multi-pronged approach to the multifaceted crisis that we are facing. We need to be broader in terms of addressing the different challenges from the political, economic, social, environmental, and different other facets in which this crisis has presented itself. And I'll come back to the issue of addressing the crisis in and of the state, particularly the state capture. And we have to see action in terms of arresting corruption. We have to arrest, prosecute, convict, and recover assets. We need to look at our developmental model versus the autocratic predatory state. And I was just thinking as well with the challenges that have been posed by COVID-19 around the vaccines diplomacy and what exactly we are giving into in terms of our economy to where we are getting our vaccines. We need to look at the issue of the rule of law versus the rule by law, where we have seen quite a number of statutory instruments, constitutional amendments, different bills that are being proposed by the current government that leaves us wondering in terms of the rule of law and our move towards the rule by law and cohesion. So we really need to look at the state of the state. I think that is where we have a big crisis, and our development partners, the international financial institutions, have to look at this issue. Then the crisis of the development model that we currently have, that's not addressing the human development deficits, but is fixated on economic growth indicators and not addressing the triple burden of unemployment, poverty, and inequality, which wears the different faces that we've spoken about. We have a crisis within the developmental model around the extractive industry and the ballooning resource-backed loans, which is really causing a serious debt burden that we do not know of, and the different lack of transparency and opaqueness in that regard. Then there's the issue of doing away with quantitative algorithms, the surpluses, everything we've spoken about, and shift our conversations and our narrative towards how is this economy responding and ensuring that people have a decent living standard. Let us address our endangered future, both in terms of climate, in terms of food, in terms of health, and in terms of our finance. And I would say it is really about rethinking our developmental model and the paradox of our developmental model around the jobless growth, voiceless growth, rootless growth, featureless growth, and rootless growth. And the state has to really work on ensuring that we have growth that respects human development. We move towards a human rights framework that measures direct development, household economies that make sense to the people, and not only look at the macroeconomic level, but bring down the economics to the household economies and how they are panning out at that level. And I will definitely continue to push for a democratic developmental state that addresses our different challenges and takes away voice from the citizens, including the diaspora, who are said within the report, the World Bank report, that actually their remittances increased, for example, in 2020. What are we doing about their voice? What are we doing about the freedom of expression during expression, but also after expression, so that we don't shrink the space and we have a simultaneous kind of approach, multi-pronged approach that address the different reforms that have to take place for us to be on a true, genuine, and sustained economic recovery trajectory, and which is not only temporary. Thank you very much, Sekuru. I hand over back to you.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you, as usual. Always so refreshing. Thank you very much. Tizara Zamchia.
Thank you, Chairperson. I don't have much to say at the moment. I almost got scared when Mr. Mverecha said that he doesn't want to talk about politics. It just reminded me of the Afrobarometer survey that I was talking about. Seems to confirm that 79% of Zimbabweans are not free to talk about politics, when the actual elephant in the room is a political crisis. So I just want to emphasize that you cannot have economic reforms in a vacuum. You need to fix the political problem. I would really love to have this debate again, Mr. Mverecha and others, in the next 18 months or so, if we are going to have a general election before a resolution of the political crisis. Then you'll see that there wouldn't be any sustained economic growth. So let's not be afraid to talk about the real elephant in the room. Let us listen to the citizens who are saying that there is need for a resolution beyond ZANU-PF, include other political parties, business, churches, ordinary citizens, to find a lasting solution. I think I'll stop there tonight, and I hope that there won't be any consequences, given that I haven't been afraid to talk about politics tonight.
Thanks, Tizara. Thanks very much indeed, as usual. Thank you, Tizara. Thank you very much indeed. Last but not least, Nzukuru Mkuru, your last words. Just a minute.
Yeah, well, I think that you know, it has been an important conversation, and good to see my friend Tony Hawkins, who I haven't spoken to in a long while. I think the issue of politics, we need to resolve our toxic politics, but there's so much to be done. There's so much damage that has been done, and I don't know how we're going to deal with corruption, which has become so endemic. How we're going to dismantle the structures of corruption in the 7 or so commanding heights of corruption that include the US dollar, fuel, command agriculture, procurement contracts, land subsidies. You know, the country is just weighed down by corruption. And one of the consequences, the offshoots of corruption, is the value system. You know, you have 3 decades of Zimbabweans who have no respect to education, who thinks that the likes of Whitney Ochivayo and others are the heroes of the day, and who think that why waste time going to school for 25 years when you can make money when you can't write your name. And so these are the things that are going to be hard to fix. I think turning around the economy, you can do this in under a year, but how do you deal with a value system that has been decimated by years and years of a predatory, extractive, group of men and women? So the task ahead is huge. The challenges ahead is huge, but as Zimbabweans collectively, we have no time. There's absolutely no time at all. And the longer the crisis persists, the more difficult it is to untangle. And I'm afraid to say that the danger that will be a permanently vulnerable, permanently fragile society, permanently fragile states are there. Another DRC, Congo, another Central Africa Republic, another South Sudan, if you like, another Somalia, if you like. So we need to wake up. It can't be business as usual.
Thanks, Ndai. Thanks very much indeed. On that note, just to not to summarize, but just to first of all to just say that this topic gave us the opportunity to look at the nature of our Zimbabwean situation. The reports or statement by the IMF and the report by the World Bank coming as it did last month has provided us, although scant on information, although controversial as has been explained, they've nevertheless given us the opportunity to introspect, to analyze our economy, and to lay it bare as the panelists have done. And of course, what's the way forward? There have been hints in both Samchia and Tendai Biti's statements. We need a political settlement, a political solution. A few months ago, some of us wrote on this, the need for us to move towards a conference on Zimbabwe, an international conference on Zimbabwe, buttressed by a national dialogue, a regional consensus, an international scaffolding towards a transition authority. The more we discuss the Zimbabwean crisis, the more we realize that elections will not resolve it, that we need to look at this animal called the transition authority. I see in Swaziland, which is on fire, the civic society is calling for transition authority. We have seen in Sudan, Khartoum, there's a transition authority, although not of the model that we'd like. But I think, if anything, this conversation has given us some insight into the intractable nature of our problem. They cannot be resolved. And as Tendai has warned us, we cannot continue indefinite levels. We simply have to put our heads together at the national level, in consultation with the region, with the support of the international community, to begin to find solutions to our problem. I thank you again, and we look forward to the next policy dialogue, which may look at the way forward for Zimbabwe in the context of a larger discussion of the intractable problems that we are facing in both the region, as Swaziland illustrates, but also the rest of Africa. Thank you, and thank you to all those who have come and joined us in the conversation. To our friends far afield, Todd Moss, our audience, the quiet, silent audience from the World Bank, IMF in Washington, and here in Harare, our officials in government who have been listening in, the Ministry of Finance, RPZ, thank you very much, and good night.